Welcome to the third in the series of Mark 5, Policy Off Leash, which are short video casts about policies affecting virtual care and veterinary medicine in the United States. Now, we've looked earlier at the basic rules right now that govern the states in terms of what's in the laws affecting veterinarians in the VCPR with telemedicine. Today, we dive into as important, but a little drier subject. And there's going to be a little feeling like this is federal politics 101. Apologies, but guess what? I think we can explain it in a way that makes sense to you. And it's important. And this concerns the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And people hear that term a lot, but that's a federal agency, obviously. And it governs both human medicine and drugs and animal medicine and drugs, and basically approves or disapproves the introduction and use of drugs and sets the rules for using drugs, both in the human and animal sphere. It doesn't get as much discussion in veterinary medicine because, as I talked about last week, veterinary medicine is very much regulated at the state level by state practice acts and state veterinary medical boards. But if you're living in the US and you're practicing veterinary medicine, there are FDA rules that affect you. And one that definitely affects you and is controversial because it causes people some confusion about whether they can use telemedicine at all is a rule governing prescriptions of off-label, prescriptions of off-label drugs. Because the FDA rule says that you can only prescribe off-label drugs for an animal if a traditional VCPR, that is a physical examination before you consider yourself the veterinarian for that animal, has taken place. And many people fear or wrongly assume, but I respect why you'd think that, many people fear that that means you really can't use telemedicine unless you've got a traditional VCPR in place. It's as if there's a national rule, and I've heard people use that phrase. Well, yes, it's true the rule governs the whole country, but number one, it's limited to what? It's limited to extra label drug prescriptions. Those are important to veterinary practices, and I understand that. But it's certainly not all that a veterinary clinic does all day long, or all that a veterinarian or a vet tech or nurse does all day long. So it regulates that one part of a practice, and you have to decide how important that is and be aware of that, obviously, in your practice. The other thing to keep in mind about FDA rules, because you may wonder, why did they even pass that rule? The FDA is mainly focused on national issues, particularly food animals, right? And that makes sense. Cattle raised in Texas aren't just slaughtered and turned into meat eaten in the state of Texas. That goes all over the country and frankly all over the world. And that applies to food animals all over the country. So what happens to an animal, a sheep, a lamb, a pig in Iowa, Oregon, you name the state, has an impact across that state's borders. And the FDA takes that very seriously. And it takes very seriously the issue of antimicrobial resistance. And it cares about that for pets too, though it's been a bigger issue, obviously, for food animals. So that's kind of the background why you have this rule. And at the time, when the FDA applied it to companion animal veterinarians in the manner I described, there was really no discussion about traditional versus non-traditional VCPR. The VCPRs pretty much all looked the same. But what happened with COVID? What happened with COVID was that the FDA, like the states we discussed last week, those 17, the FDA waived during COVID, and it's still in effect as of the middle of October, it waived the requirement of a traditional VCPR for prescribing extra label drugs for veterinary medicine for the same reasons: concern about social distancing, the safety and health and welfare of pet owners, as well as veterinary staff and teams. And that went into effect. And again, that's significant, right? Because the FDA would not have taken that step if it believed that was going to lead to harm to pets across this country. That would have been reckless, and it wouldn't have happened. At the same time, we now have, at the national level, a laboratory, don't we? We can see if the FDA's received any evidence or complaints of negligent harm or death even for a pet due to the prescribing of an extra label drug where there wasn't a traditional VCPR, but instead a telemedicine VCPR. And this really adds to the learning we have from 17 states during COVID, from the province of Ontario for the last 3 years, and now the FDA nationally, as to how has it worked when we've allowed a telemedicine VCPR to be created. And I think it opens a door for dialogue between states and their VMAs and whomever with the FDA about whether that rule might end up looking a little different to say, as long as a veterinarian is in compliance with her state's VCPR rules, they can prescribe extra label prescription drugs. Thanks for watching, and remember to go to the vvca.org website if you want to be part of a general conversation with other colleagues about these and other issues concerning virtual care. Thanks. If you want more information or even more fun to engage in an extended conversation with your colleagues about these issues, go to the Veterinary Virtual Care Association or vvca.org website, where our 3,600 member strong organization is engaging on all topics that concern telemedicine and virtual care for veterinary practices, not just limited to the policies I'm discussing, but how do you use it best? How do you implement it? How do you train your staff? What are the proper roles for all the staff members? And actually, importantly, how pet owners have reacted to it. We'll see you next week. Thanks.